Deputy Executive Director for Development, Research and Innovation, Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, Dr. Adil Johan, Deputy Executive Director for Academic and Student Affairs, Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, Professor Dr. Shanthi Thambiah, Honorary Professor, Gender Studies, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Universiti Malaya, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Salamat Datang and a very warm welcome to the Forum on Empowering Voices, ASEAN Centrality and Women, Peace and Security. To begin the forum, we would like to call Associate Professor Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers, Deputy Executive Director for Development, Research and Innovation of the Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, for his welcoming remarks.
Her Excellency Maria Angela Ponce, Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to Malaysia, Yang Berbahagia Distinguished Professor Dato Dr. Rajah, Executive Director of the Asia-Europe Institute, Universiti Malaya, and the moderator for today's forum, Her Excellency Elizabeth Buensuceso, Philippines Eminent Person to High-Level Task Force on ASEAN Community Post-2025 Vision and author of ASEAN Centrality and Autoethnographic Account by a Philippines Diplomat, Her Excellency Dato Astanah Abdul Aziz, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Political Security Community, Professor Dr. Shanthi Thambiah, Honorary Professor, Gender Studies, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Universiti Malaya, Dr. Adil Johan, Executive Director, Academic and Student Affairs, Asia-Europe Institute, members from the diplomatic community, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Selamat datang, good afternoon, magandang hapon po. On behalf of the Asia-Europe Institute, AEI, Universiti Malaya, I would like to welcome all of you again, selamat datang and maligayang pandating po. The origins of AEI can be traced back to the establishment, the closer education linkage between Asia and Europe under the provision of the Asia-Europe Meeting ASEM Initiative 1996. Subsequently, in 1997, the government of Malaysia, through the Parliamentary Act, established the Asia-Europe Centre, or AEC. 3 years after its inception on the 2nd January 2000, the AEC was transformed into a full-fledged academic institution, and it was renamed as Asia-Europe Institute, or AEI, and hosted by the University of Malaya, the oldest university in Malaysia. AEI offers postgraduate courses, including a Master's in ASEAN Studies and a Master's in European Studies and a PhD by research. Ladies and gentlemen, besides teaching and learning, AEI is also actively involved in research and publications. We recently conducted a 2-day workshop on book digitization, Southeast Asia, with the digitization and climate resilience towards strengthening the sustainable development ecosystem in Southeast Asia with the Open Society Foundation, or OSF. Besides, AEI also conducts ambassadorial lecture series very similar to the event that we are having now. Previously, we had the Ambassador of Spain, Ambassador from South Africa. In addition, we also organize eminent lecture series, such as the lecture by Professor Sugata Bose from Harvard University and Professor Kitaoka, former president of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, and also a public forum on the situation in Myanmar. Ladies and gentlemen, this year is crucial in the bilateral relations between Malaysia and the Philippines. Both countries celebrate the 60th anniversary, as you can see the board here. 60th anniversary, or sometimes is also known as the Diamond Jubilee of diplomatic relation. Despite their ups and downs, like any other relations, in the past 60 years, like Diamond, like the song Diamond sung by Dame Shirley Bassey, Diamonds Are Forever, all right, the bilateral relations is still precious, shining, and strong, like a diamond is one of the strongest entity. All right, Malaysia and Philippines were among the two founding members of ASEAN in 1967. Both countries share a common vision for peaceful, prosperous region and rule of law. In addition, Malaysia and Philippines share many cultural tradition and terminologies that are very similar. I'm sure you heard of anak, bulan, sakit, and lima. We shared some similar terms, both the Tagalog as well in the Malay language. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to witness a public forum commemorating this exceptional anniversary. And the theme of today's forum is Empowering Voices, ASEAN Centrality, Women, Peace, and Security. The population of women in ASEAN make up slightly half the population. There have been several notable developments for women in the region in recent years, such as education, job opportunities, access to healthcare. Women's voices and leadership are crucial to sustaining the regional peace, stability, and development. ASEAN is committed to advancing women, peace, and security, WPS, as a regional priority agenda. WPS agenda in ASEAN is guided by the commitments to implement the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 in the year 2000. However, there is still a lot to be done. We are hopeful when Malaysia becomes the chair of ASEAN, there will be more significant progress in WPS, and similarly, in 2026, the Philippines will be the chair of ASEAN, and today we have 3 eminent speakers and a moderator to address this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to cite Jose Rizal, the hero of the Philippines, words to the women of Malolos. Let her be loved, not only for her beauty and an amiable character, but also for her strength of her mind and loftiness of purpose, which enliven and raise feeble and timid one of all vain thought. Let her be the pride of the country and let her command respect. Lihan para Karba Hilhan ang Malolos, or letter to the women of Malolos. So again, a very warm welcome. Terima kasih. Thank you. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Professor Roy. May I now invite Her Excellency Maria Angela A. Ponce, Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to Malaysia, for her special remarks.
Good afternoon, our excellencies and our esteemed guests, and our distinguished speakers and students. It is a pleasure to not just to welcome you all to today's forum, but to be back in a university atmosphere. And of course, to welcome you to this forum on empowering voices, ASEAN Centrality, and women, peace, and security. This event is a collaborative effort between the Philippine Embassy and the Asia-Europe Institute of the University of Malaya as part of the embassy's array of activities commemorating the 60th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between our country and Malaysia. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Dato Rajah, Rasiah, and the entire AEI team for their invaluable support in making this event possible, and whom we have been working on so closely and tirelessly since we first met in April to make this event come together. So thank you very much. For me, it was important to have an academic dialogue especially in the context of ASEAN, as part of the commemoration of our 60th anniversary. As Professor Roy said, the Philippines and Malaysia are both co-founding members of ASEAN. We are close neighbors, and of course, after Malaysia's chairship, the Philippines will be next. So I think it's a very good opportunity to discuss all of this in the light of a very significant anniversary. We have always aspired to promote academic dialogue and exchanges in our anniversary celebrations, and your partnership has enabled us to achieve it through today's forum. For this, we are deeply grateful. This forum is especially timely as Malaysia prepares to take on the ASEAN chairship for 2025. And just yesterday, our fellow ambassadors here were at Wisma Putra for a briefing on Malaysia's launching of Malaysia's logo for the ASEAN chairship, as well as a briefing on the outcomes of the last summits of ASEAN and on the what's to be expected for ASEAN's chairship. So I think very timely that we have this today, and this makes today's discussion even more relevant. It also bears noting that from the 28th to the 30th of October, the Philippines will be hosting the first ministerial level international conference on women, peace, and security in Manila. This will be spearheaded by our Foreign Ministry, the Office of the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity, our Philippine Commission on Women, and the Department of Budget and Management, in partnership with UN Women, the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy, and the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. With the theme Forging Collaboration and Convergence for Advancing Women, Peace, and Security, this landmark event will bring together high-level ministers from UN member states, national government officials, including from Malaysia, and international and local civil society organizations and key stakeholders to discuss advancements in WPS and promote women's participation in global peace-building efforts. This event will also mark the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and related WPS frameworks, which reaffirm the vital role of women in conflict prevention, resolution, peace negotiations, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and post-conflict reconstruction. Today, but especially me, I'm privileged to have with us a distinguished panel of speakers, including our very own Her Excellency Ambassador Elizabeth Buensuceso, the Philippines' eminent person to the High-Level Task Force on ASEAN Communities Post-2045 Vision. Within the Foreign Ministry and in the Philippines, and I'm sure among all of our ASEAN colleagues, Ambassador Beth is legendary for her deep understanding of the ins and outs of ASEAN. And I'm looking forward to what she will be sharing with us today. And I hope that we ask her a lot of questions because she's raring to answer those questions that we may have. Also joining our distinguished panel is Her Excellency Dato Astanah Abdul Aziz, the Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Political Security Community, and Professor Dr. Shanthi Thambiah, Honorary Professor on Gender Studies at Universiti Malaya. So thank you very much. They each bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in the fields of ASEAN and gender issues. We look forward to hearing your perspectives and exploring how we can ensure that women's leadership is central to ASEAN's efforts, fostering a more inclusive and stable region for all. Your insights will be crucial in advancing this important agenda. Thank you, and I wish everyone a fruitful and inspiring discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador Ponce. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to begin our discussion, may I now invite to the stage our esteemed panel of speakers, Her Excellency Ambassador Elizabeth P. Buensuceso, Her Excellency Dato Astanah Abdul Aziz, and Professor Dr. Shanthi Thambiah. I also wish to invite our esteemed moderator for this forum, distinguished Professor Dato Dr. Rajah Rasiah. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. since we already have an introduction of our passionate speakers today, let me, in the interest of time, speak from here. I begin first by acknowledging Her Excellency Maria Angela A. Ponce, the Ambassador of the Republic of Philippines to Malaysia, Excellency Elizabeth Buensuceso, the Philippines' eminent person to the high-level task force on ASEAN Community's post-2045 vision. And of course, our Filipino ambassador to Malaysia called her a legend. Yeah, she's, among other things, her accomplishments include a well-regarded book. She is the author, ASEAN Centrality, an autoethnographic account by a Filipino diplomat. I believe she will be narrating us with a lot of what she's written there, and perhaps more. Then we have Excellency Dato Astanah. Among the points that I would like to mention for a high-level role in a diplomatic role, it's the Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Political Security Community. Is an accomplishment for getting a very interesting international award from the Moroccan government. And then my deputies, Professor Roy Anthony Rogers, Dr. Adil Johan. Then we have one of our panel speakers here, Professor Shanthi Thambiah. Among her accomplishments, I think she's arguably the most eminent social anthropologist to have graced University of Malaya, perhaps Malaysia as well. And her specialization is on gender studies. I'd also like to mention some eminent persons here. Ambassador Jose Cuadro, who gave a wonderful lecture here some time back. Institute, Professor Adira Hashim, she was my director for quite a while. Let's start by me first mentioning that gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. While there has been progress, the UN officials argue that the world will not be on track to meet its Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 5. Women and girls represent half of the world's population, but gender inequality persists everywhere to the point of stunting social progress. For example, women in the labor force still earn 23% less than men, while they work with 3 times as many hours in unpaid domestic and care work as men. Sexual violence and exploitation, unequal division of unpaid care and domestic work, and discrimination in public office still persists. Over the COVID-19 pandemic, reports of sexual violence has actually surged. It is unfortunate that the UN itself thinks that it'll take 300 years to end child marriage. 300 years, I'm sure none of us will be alive here. 286 years to close gaps in legal protection and remove discriminatory laws. 140 years for women to be represented equally in positions of power and leadership in the workplace. And 47 years to achieve equal representation in parliaments. A series of ASEAN declarations, especially since 2000, upholding and reaffirming the UN's call for gender equality and an end to gender discrimination and segregation has actually taken place. Let me mention an important point before I call the speakers to present their accounts to make our panel discussion rich enough to excite you, apart from filling up whatever questions you may have in your mind. I think one of the things that indicators of development, like how many women are being employed, how many of them are enjoying high salaries, how many of them are enjoying high salaries, and how many of them are in power. Of course, we've had 2 female Filipino presidents. I'm not sure Indonesia has got one, but we've never had one from Malaysia. Now, what I'd like to mention here is the notion of inclusiveness doesn't tend to reflect the sort of SDG number 5 that we expect, the passionate articulation of what's really happening to women. Much of the reports tend to just report incidents of unemployment and so on, as if there is not much inclusion by the way of women and girls participate in shaping their destinies, which is actually the root, the basis behind how inclusiveness is actually defined if we take the word out from the works of Paulo Freire and Peter Berger. They should be actually defining and participating in shaping their destinies. Now, of course, it's not me to tell about this, and I'm really happy that I initially thought they wouldn't like me to moderate, because in my experience, being a student, I never thought a woman would have allowed me to chair a session talking about women. But it's interesting that I didn't call myself to moderate this session, but I'm lucky that there wasn't any serious objection. So let's begin with, I am sorry, distinguished guests, speakers, that time constraints mean that I've been told you all are given 12 minutes each to speak. Let's start with Ambassador Elizabeth Buensuceso. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ponce and Dr. Rajah. Your partnership has enabled me to come here. It is a passionate advocacy of mine to be able to tell others, especially ASEANites, the citizens of ASEAN, about ASEAN, so that we can understand these regional organizations more closely. I also apologize for the gender imbalance in people on stage here, but I'm sure Dr. Rajah is ably representing everybody. I'd like to recognize also Ambassador Sharifa, who was with me in the Jakarta channel. I'll talk about it in a little while. I call it the Jakarta channel, the group of 6 ASEAN mechanisms that are based in Jakarta that have become the loci of important decision making. You have chosen 2 of my favorite topics, ASEAN Centrality and Women, Peace and Security. Of course, there's another WPS that is close to my heart. Make a guess. West Philippine Sea. Okay, we'll talk about that later if you want. I'll be the one. Can you just click? Anyway, I have very little time, so I'll be very quick. I also apologize for the frequent mention of my book. I'm trying to sell my book. Please buy. All royalties will go to charity. That's how desperate I am. Anyway, let me just say a few things about these 2 topics. In today's world, you have often heard the expression that we are besieged by so many challenges, so many issues. Some of them are listed in your on your screen: great power rivalry, trade wars, threat to security stability, digital transformation that is besieging us everywhere in all the 3 or 4 pillars of ASEAN, and so on and so forth. And for me, the ASEAN response should be ASEAN Centrality, because without ASEAN Centrality, we'll just be ripped apart by all these challenges that are upon us. We've heard of the expression ASEAN Centrality everywhere. People keep mouthing it, but so far, there hasn't been any formal definition of what ASEAN Centrality would be. Those of you who have been following the summits from several years ago up to now, you've heard many of our leaders and our people say ASEAN Centrality. What is ASEAN Centrality? Some academics, very good ones, foremost ASEAnologist Acharya, says ASEAN Centrality is being in the driver's seat. Tan in 2016 offered another definition. ASEAN being a regional leader, ASEAN as a regional convener, ASEAN as a regional hub, ASEAN as a regional driver of progress, and ASEAN as a regional convenience. Yes, I appreciate those very interesting definitions, but they're from the academic point of view. How do you exactly become a being in the driver's seat? How do you exercise leadership in the region, etc.? And so this has, in 2018, Ibu Retno, Foreign Minister of Indonesia, she called for the very first time a high-level meeting on the Indo-Pacific strategy, the first time ever, before the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. And she invited ministers from all over the EAS member states. And, I heard minister after minister talk about their own Indo-Pacific strategy. Some called it GSI, some called it Belt Road, some called it New Outlook, Indo-Pacific, New Open, etc. And found out that everybody had a different interpretation of what ASEAN Centrality is. And this has prodded me to come up with a definition of ASEAN Centrality that is culled from my personal experience as a practitioner of ASEAN diplomacy. So just to summarize, number one, there are 3 dimensions to my definition of ASEAN centrality. And the first dimension is ASEAN's ability to deliver major accomplishments through the ASEAN chair. I heard just now that you're offering Master of Arts in ASEAN Studies. Those of you, I'd encourage you to study this particular platform, the ASEAN chairship, which is for me, an interesting process by which national aspirations are elevated to a regional platform. They become, the region owns your national interest. And so therefore, ASEAN is able to deliver important achievements which elevates the stature of ASEAN. So ASEAN becomes central as a major player in regional, even in the global stage. One very interesting example is RCEP, which is the biggest trade, free trade agreement in the world. RCEP has elevated the stature of ASEAN. It had been the national ambition of the Philippines when we chaired ASEAN 2017, became the ambition of Singapore, didn't happen. And only during the, ironically, during the COVID times, Vietnam finally delivered RCEP. So it's a good example. During our time, in my book, I, of course, talked about the achievements, important achievements that the Philippines delivered during that time. The 2 leader statement on women, peace and security, and gender mainstreaming of the WPS agenda in all the pillars of ASEAN cooperation, so etc. So the ability of the ASEAN chair to deliver important achievements for ASEAN is an element of ASEAN centrality because it elevates the stature of ASEAN as a global, not just a regional player. But the second most important definition for me of ASEAN centrality is, it is a principle of diplomacy with ASEAN deciding. I would even want to use the word seizing or dictating the agenda, the participants, the language, and the processes of cooperation. By the way, one word about autoethnography, it's quite a mouthful. It's a very interesting method of research. She's nodding. She knows the autoethnographic methodology very well. It's beautiful. While it is anecdotal, personalized in approach, in tone, it has academic discipline. So you are combining academic discipline plus, it's not a memoir, but it's anecdotal in its approach. So I narrate anecdotes about my experience in the Jakarta channel, how ASEAN has seized the agenda because our external partners would want to dictate the agenda. The participants, the language, ASEAN language is different from the confrontational, formal language of other nations or regional groupings. ASEAN would rather use the informal approach, etc. So I narrate several incidents there, and one of them is the negotiation of the EAS leader statement on chemical weapons. When our dialogue partners have, were you there, Dato? Have turned our discussion into a mini security council. Because of the nature of our negotiations and the agenda, the tone, and the process was already being taken away from ASEAN. And so in this anecdote, I narrated that we worked until midnight to finish this ASEAN leaders EAS declaration on chemical weapons. And I even joked among my colleagues, if we don't finish by 12 o'clock, all of you will turn into pumpkins, and I'm going to become Cinderella. Anyway, this is the tone of autoethnography. If you want to know more, please read the book. And of course, the third dimension of ASEAN Centrality, according to my experience, is it is an aspiration to raise the level of awareness about ASEAN. My name is Buensuceso. It means buen is, of course, good. And suceso is event or news, good news. But I'll tell you bad news first. There's a very low level of ASEAN awareness among our people. What is the good news? It's coming up. It's being raised. And even the ASEAN Secretariat has now become more aggressive in bringing ASEAN to the people it serves. Next. Okay, that's the book. Please buy it. I have 1 minute. Okay. Can you go ahead first? Okay. I had wanted to tell you about where we are now in the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 that we are crafting. This is the successor document to the ASEAN 2025. Your themes are there. Next slide. I can go back later if you have questions. Go ahead, please. Next slide. The slide is not counted in the minutes. Next slide, please. Who's doing this? Okay. On WPS, I'm happy to tell you that the Philippines, together with our ASEAN partners, have already come up with several initiatives to put in the voices of women, the so-called WPS agenda, and ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, OPAR. Yeah, okay. But I just want to, I will allow her to speak on this later, but these are many of the initiatives. I just want you to look at the first one, because it was the Philippines, who tried very hard to negotiate a very difficult initiative, because not every member state has a peace and reconciliation issue. What would Singapore and Brunei have to do? They said they didn't have peace and reconciliation experts, etc. But here is when ASEAN comes together, even if not all member states had a stake in the process. Okay, I'll ask Dato Astanah to talk about the others later on, but just to show you that there have been several initiatives. Ambassador Ponce already spoke about our big event in Manila, the International Conference on WPS. Next slide. Those are the awesome OPAR, I call them, ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. What they do, what they can do for ASEAN, you can ask me later. And do we have any more? This is the initiative I was telling you about. For the Philippines, the WPS is an important issue, and so therefore it became two of our major initiatives during our chairmanship, etc. I don't have time now. I just want to tell you that because WPS is an important issue in the Philippines, my mission in Jakarta organized 5 training programs for women on mediation, on facilitation, on WPS issues to push forward the issue of WPS. And of course, we are now fighting in the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 for this specific topic to become to play an important role in the ASEAN Community Vision 2045. Thank you for your generosity.
Elizabeth Buensuceso. Now I pass the cue to Dato Astanah, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First off, I'd like to express my deep appreciation to Dr. Rasiah and Professor Roy at the Asia-Europe Institute, University Malaya, and also to Ambassador Ponce and the Embassy of the Philippines in Malaysia for co-hosting this event in conjunction with the 60th anniversary of bilateral relations between Malaysia and the Philippines. Looking at the topic, this is actually an extremely big topic. There are 3 forums if you break them up, because Empowering Voices is a forum in itself, so is ASEAN Centrality, and then separately Women, Peace and Security is a forum in itself. And I was informed relatively late on the full topic, so I will only be speaking on Women, Peace and Security this afternoon, and also it's going to be a very factual presentation. I'm going to talk about what ASEAN has done on this topic. This year marks the 7th anniversary of the adoption of the joint statement on promoting women, peace and security by the ASEAN leaders at the 31st ASEAN Summit in 2017 in Manila, the Philippines. And then in December 2018, and this was what Ambassador Elizabeth was mentioning earlier, ASEAN launched the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. Its objectives are to contribute to the implementation of the joint statement adopted the year before, and subsequently to support ASEAN member states in developing their respective national action plans. The following year, in 2019, ASEAN established an advisory group on women, peace and security as part of its efforts to engage relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies and institutions across the 3 community pillars of ASEAN, which is political security, economic pillar, and the socio-cultural pillar. And this is done with a view to advancing the women, peace, and security agenda at the regional level. And then 3 years later, in 2022, an ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Women, Peace, and Security was adopted by the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summits. This must have been during the Cambodian chairmanship of ASEAN. Meanwhile, ASEAN member states are currently in the process of developing their respective national action plans based on ASEAN's regional action plan. To date, 3 ASEAN member states have already developed their national action plan on women, peace and security, which are Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. Now, the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action is designed to respond to both traditional and emerging security challenges, such as climate change, disasters, pandemics, and violent extremism. Most importantly, it identifies broad strategies and approaches to the realization of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the ASEAN region, and highlights the 4 key pillars of the agenda, namely protection, participation, prevention, and relief and recovery. And then in July last year, the ASEAN Women, Peace and Security Summit was convened, which provided a platform for ASEAN sectoral bodies to engage, share best practices, and support coordination and synergies in their efforts to mainstream that agenda within ASEAN. Ladies and gentlemen, the joint statement on promoting women, peace and security in 2017 acknowledges the disproportionate impact of armed conflict on women and girls. It underscores the importance of women's participation in all stages of peace processes, from prevention and conflict resolution to peacekeeping and post-conflict reconstruction. This aligns with the core principles of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which calls for the increased participation of women in decision-making related to peace and security. Now, the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action identifies 5 broad strategies for the realization of the Women, Peace and Security agenda within the ASEAN region. Namely, 1, to ensure women's participation in preparedness and response to both traditional and emerging security issues and concerns. 2, to promote a whole-of-society approach to governance reforms and peace and security in policy making. 3, increase the meaningful participation of women in peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace-building efforts. 4, ensure the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda are equipped to address the needs of all women and men. And 5, enhance coordination and cooperation at the humanitarian development peace nexus to address conflict risk factors and disaster preparedness through gender-responsive strategies and approaches. Other than these 5 broad strategies, the Regional Plan of Action also highlights 6 approaches to the realization of the agenda. 1, translate commitment into implementation of the agenda at the regional and national levels, hence the plans of action. 2, enhance institutional capacity for women, peace and security analysis and response at both the regional and national levels. 3, foster constructive engagement and dialogue with civil society, which is imperative for the implementation of women, peace and security. 4, create a wide space for women's participation in peace and security field, including in the defense sector. 5, increase leadership, understanding and involvement of men in implementing the WPS agenda. And 6, increase women's engagement and participation in policy and planning with respect to prevention and response or recovery. Now, moving on to the sectoral level, particularly in sectors within the ASEAN political security community, which is my sector, I would like to share that ASEAN is mainstreaming this agenda in the defense sector, particularly through the ASEAN Peacekeeping Centers Network. In 2019, that network agreed to include this Women, Peace and Security agenda in all future meetings and to establish a list of gender focal points among the ASEAN member states to enhance training for female deployment in UN peacekeeping missions. Relatedly, it is worth noting that at the 16th ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting in 2022, it adopted the concept paper on enhancing support mechanism for women peacekeepers to establish a network for women peacekeepers to enhance their participation at UN peacekeeping operations. Another ASEAN-led mechanism which supports the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda is the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ARF. In 2019, the ARF adopted the joint statement on promoting the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the ASEAN Regional Forum, which aimed to strengthen the capacity of peacekeeping operations by increasing deployment and the meaningful participation of women in the planning and implementation of peacekeeping operations. The ARF's commitment to the agenda is likewise manifested by the 8th ARF Peacekeeping Experts Meeting, which underscored the importance of strong political and military leadership, practical strategies, and collective advocacy to advance the agenda across the ARF. Complementing these efforts are those of the efforts of individual ASEAN member states. The most recent example is the effort of the current chair of ASEAN, Lau PDR, which hosted the Southeast Asian Women Ambassadors Forum on Peace in July 2024 in Vientiane. The forum gathered women ambassadors to discuss the evolving practice of diplomacy and how it plays into the landscape of peace and conflict. Notably, it showcased the increasing involvement of women in leading peace and security initiatives. I think it will come as no surprise to all of you that, of course, Ambassador Elizabeth is very much part of that. Also worth noting is the effort of Indonesia under the recently former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Her Excellency Retno Marsudi, in initiating the formation of a Southeast Asia Women Peace Mediators in 2020. This Southeast Asia Women Peace Mediators initiative undertakes mediation and negotiation practices to support the work for sustainable peace, and it facilitates and engages in efforts aimed at preventing or resolving the escalation of violent conflicts. To end, allow me to stress that promoting and mainstreaming the women, peace and security agenda may be a long process. However, we are confident with the ASEAN member states and the ASEAN sectoral bodies working together with support from our external partners, the women, peace and security agenda would be substantively promoted in the region. Allow me also a small personal comment, which I should have done at the end. I'm usually a little bit uneasy at fora on women in any category where the speakers are only women, because I think necessarily you need both women and men to focus their mind on this issue if we're going to make progress. But I would also like to say that I think I am on this panel not because I'm a female, but because the issue of women, peace and security falls under the political security pillar that I handle within the ASEAN Secretariat. And hence I'm here not because I'm a female, but because I represent that community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato Astanah. Now, before I pass the mic to Professor Shanthi, I myself am editing a book with Dr. Adil and Tan Sri Kamal. It's called Voices of the Vulnerable. And of course, women occupy a significant part of it. This is to honor a lecturer who taught me an elective course. He was really unhappy that I chose not to switch over from business and economics to anthropology. But because I saw him as a passionate guy, we are doing this book, and you're welcome to contribute a chapter if you have the time. Professor Shanthi, the floor is yours.
I'm going to stand. Thank you very much to AEI for inviting a feminist anthropologist to speak on this topic. Women, peace and security. So for feminists, research on women, peace and security is often revisionist. We want to change what is the norm, what is being practiced, because it doesn't seem to work. You're seeing so many wars happening at the moment, and women are suffering. And what is the WPS agenda doing to address this? It's very, very upsetting for a lot of people, and for a lot of feminists, WPS has failed, unfortunately. So feminist research on WPS is often revisionist. It is concerned with looking again at what has been accepted as a field of study and asking how gender created it and was created by it. So discursive analysis of the resolutions within the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, if we look at the formal language within WPS in the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, we see the language largely sees women as victims of conflict, and its member states' roles is one of protection. We need to protect women. So it's very paternalistic, and that we need to protect women within the conditions of war. But nothing much about making sure that the world is peaceful is in WPS. So much contemporary feminist researchers on WPS are interested in the language. If you look at the language within ASEAN's WPS or the language within the UN Security Council's Resolution 1325, the language is predominantly very not against war, but towards protecting women within the context of conflict. But not much effort and initiative is put in addressing or stopping the conflict in itself, but in addressing, we have a war, we need to protect women within the context of that violence. So we need to also look at within the texts, within the resolutions and various UN documents, 1325 is seen as a site at which discourses of international security and gender violence are in contact, and a site at which it is possible to identify different articulations of the concepts of gender, violence, security, and international that constitutes different discourses. And in doing so, 1325 creates certain conceptions of women, as if all women are same. Are we all same? No. But there's a general sweeping concept of women being applied in those texts. Violence and the international is seen as a concept rather than having and carrying many meanings. So in work on the broader range of the VPS resolutions, the discourse of acknowledging women as agents is only beginning to being added on, additional additions to this, and with women forced to take on peace-building roles. So the peace is shattered, and the role of the women is to peacekeeping and peace building. I think it's just too late. If you want peace, it's not just for peacekeeping and peace building. We need to make peace, peacemaking. For peacemaking, then there is a need for us to look at the entire planet, like we take a look at climate change. So for climate change, we are looking at planetary well-being, isn't it? What are we doing? We are cutting back on greenhouse gases. We are introducing green technology. What do you do within the context of war and peace? We need to cut back on, yes, armament. We need to disarm the world. It's the same approach, the way we want to save the planet from climate disasters. We are reaching the tipping point anyway, and but there is commitment to cutting back. But commitment to cutting back on arming nation states is not there. There's so much more effort to arming nation states rather than disarming nation states. So for me, ASEAN centrality would mean that ASEAN can play a leadership role towards this global governance of peace and security, which is coming to us from the United Nations Security Council, which is certainly not in any way, if you look at the way they have managed wars. There seems to be a high level of hypocrisy, because these are countries that make and sell weapons, who are sitting in the United Nations Security Council. So will they be against disarmament, for example? So these are things that we need to look into when we talk about peace. And it's extremely unfair to expect women to be involved in peacekeeping and in peace building and not address the major issues or the major cause of the situation that requires women to keep peace, for peacekeeping and for peace building. So the major cause needs to be addressed. So feminists have always been talking about disarmament. And I think there is a lesson we can learn from ASEAN. Way back in 1971, ASEAN actually had a declaration called the Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality. And they also had a commitment to disarmament in the form of not taking on nuclear weapons. It took a stance against nuclearization. That's a very powerful statement that was made in 1971 when there was a war happening in Southeast Asia, Vietnam. And in Vietnam, what happened was we saw America, and then we saw China and Russia all getting involved in the Vietnam War. And what ASEAN did at that time, that leadership was brilliant. What ASEAN did at that time is that they said non-intervention. Intervention seems to be the main cause of many wars around the world. Intervention. And that intervention can be to uphold democracy. That intervention can be making sure that the country is democratic, doesn't become socialist or communist, the Vietnam War. And then the justification given for that war is always like upholding human rights and democracy to enter into war, and in the process committing so much atrocities. Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria. Now you see what's happening. These are countries that have championed democracy, human rights, and these are the countries that are arming countries to go to war. This is really something we need to question. And feminists have always wanted to make sure that we disarm. With armament, we can never ever achieve peace because people are making money out of it. Nations are making money out of the arms industry. So if it's peaceful, arms industries will have to shut down. So 2 minutes. Okay. So coming back to ASEAN's role and ASEAN centrality, here ASEAN has a major role in global leadership in terms of showing that we have, as a region, been able to keep armament of the region to the minimum by being anti-nuclear, not nuclearizing our nation states. And we have also declared ourselves as a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. And the other aspect is more current processes, which is also something that is credible, is to get the enemy on board in dialogue. Like, ASEAN dialogue members. Okay, China, Russia, US, or we don't use them as enemies, potential threats to the region, on board in dialogue. And I think if diplomats would like dialogue more than war, that should be the contribution of ASEAN to global peace, to ensure that we engage in dialogue, maintain neutrality, don't choose sides, talk to people who are potential threats, and try and avoid any form of conflict, be it at sea or on land, mostly at sea at the moment. Thank you very much.
Professor Shanthi, Thambiah, it's interesting that you raised a lot of contentious questions to some, but it sounded interesting to me. In a way, you also invoked the Bandung Conference, where the non-aligned movement basically was born and subsequently became formal in Belgrade in 1961. The interesting thing there is I myself as a student used the West Library to check what Sukarno's stand was in relation to the Vietnam War, which lasted from 1955 to 1975. It's interesting that he never voted against the US, but he stood neutral. He stood neutral. He was accused of being on the other side. But anyway, the reason I brought that out too, I'm still questioning my stand as a manager. I've tried to be democratic. I really feel that I may be failing because I left it to Dr. Roy and Dr. Kevin and the others, especially Ambassador Maria Ponce and a team to decide on what they want to say, because in the end, you'll never know what will be consensus. But I just hope that the consensus would meet what we think will bring world peace. In fact, we are editing a book, I'm editing with him, which is called Zokpan, Nam, because Zokpan was born from Nam, and ASEAN, Beyond Hegemons and Superpower Rivalry. In fact, if you want to contribute, you could. Now I open the floor for discussion. Maybe I start with the questions already sent to me. This is actually questions for Ambassador Elizabeth Buensuceso. You are the author of the book ASEAN Centrality. Can you briefly discuss what you mean by the term, the concept ASEAN Centrality? It's a question given to me.
Oh, anyway, I discussed it very briefly just now. But to summarize, ASEAN Centrality is the ability of ASEAN to drive the agenda, the processes, the mechanisms. Mechanisms are very important. You've often heard of the expression ASEAN-led mechanisms. Well, how are they ASEAN-led? So, in the Jakarta channel, there are 6 of them in Jakarta. That's a Committee of Permanent Representatives, CPR, which is, even if I came from there myself, I don't mind saying it's a very powerful body. Why? Because it controls the purse strings of ASEAN. By the way, in the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 that we are crafting now, we have introduced institutional strengthening, and one of the reforms we are introducing is the increase, very practical issue, I don't know among men, but among women. Money is a very practical issue, to increase member states' contribution. Anyway, as I said, to seize the processes, to dictate the agenda, and not be swayed by this and that external partners, personal or national priorities. But Professor Shanthi told you already that the diplomat's objective is to come to a consensus. Now, let me preempt. I'm sure one of you is going to ask. Consensus is one of the dirtiest words in ASEAN. Yeah? Many academics have condemned consensus in ASEAN, especially in the issues covering the South China Sea, Myanmar, and human rights. And you have some reason to do so. But consensus is the concept that has enabled ASEAN to be where it is now. On the issue of the South China Sea, if there is any one person who should be the most frustrated in our inability to reach a common stand, because this is the definition of ASEAN Centrality that some people say about ASEAN Centrality, is the inability to come to a common stand on the South China Sea issue. Even if I am from one of the member states who is one of the most active participants in this, we call it West Philippine Sea, WPS also in the Philippines, South China Sea issue, I don't mind to say that there are levels of consensus in that issue. Where does ASEAN reach a consensus on the South China Sea issue? It is in the fact that all member states use one of the principles of ASEAN. The ASEAN way is the peaceful settlement of disputes and the shunning of the use of force or the threat to use force in the settlement of disputes. We don't go about ramming each other's naval vessels. You know, a few months ago, Vietnam, Malaysia earlier, applied with the United Nations on their continental shelf claims. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the continental shelf claim. Of course, that is contrary to the Philippine position. We didn't go about ramming each other's vehicles or naval vessels. What did we do? We even offered to help each other's fishermen. We told each other, ASEAN member states, we told each other, let us discuss this in a friendly way, peaceful settlement of disputes. Now, why did I go there? The question was ASEAN Centrality. I failed to mention one of the elements of ASEAN Centrality is the use of ASEAN principles, not other people's principles. I'm sure you've heard of the ASEAN way. Peaceful settlement of disputes, non-interference, sovereignty, the renunciation of the use of force, etc., and the non-confrontational language. This is ASEAN centrality. We solve our differences in a peaceful way. You know, ASEAN, I have never seen a group of 10 or now 11 countries that are so different from one another. And we have 101 reasons to fight each other, to hurl missiles at each other because of our border disputes, maritime disputes. Malaysia versus Indonesia, Philippines versus Indonesia. We just settled our EEZ issue. Cambodia, Thailand, etc. We have 101 reasons why we should hurl missiles at each other. We don't do that because of the ASEAN way, the ASEAN principle of peaceful settlement of disputes. These should be the principles that should be applied when tackling differences between and among each other. So for me, this is ASEAN centrality. The use of ASEAN principles, the use of ASEAN processes, the use of ASEAN mechanisms, and the use of the tone and language and the dictation of the agenda of ASEAN. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I very much understand. I remember being a friend of General El Monte and how fishing boats would chase. He was talking about Pahlawan, and of course, the World Court's ruling. This is what another late friend of mine used to say, Surin Pitsuwan. Constructive engagement does have its gaps, its shortcomings, but I think to some extent, I'm not sure if the converse took place, including, say, now with Myanmar, although we had a interesting workshop on that crisis. I myself have met the generals in 1994. I'm not sure whether total consensus can be achieved, and you were using the term, it's a dirty word. Indeed, for the most political scientists, it isn't working, but where in the world have we got that sort of solution? I have a problem with that. It's just like, we tend to, in fact, we used to have dialogue sessions with the European Parliament, and we end up believing that they were stand at that time that negotiations will not become the solution, and therefore the intervention by the US and its allies were justifiable in responding, although, of course, the stand is Russia was the aggressor having intervened in Ukraine. But that's the same argument that can be put down by Jeffrey Sachs, that this whole problem started in 2014. So we end up going back, changing dates and so on, and still remaining without consensus. But anyway, since the forum is on women, let's open the floor to topics on women, please. Just we have, please, the first person, second person. Can someone bring a mic to her and then subsequently the guy in front? I actually have to go. I have to be online session post budget. I told them I'll do online because I too far to travel.
Good afternoon. My name is Ahanta, and I'm from the Baha'i International Community, which tries to work in the ASEAN region. We know that women naturally have a larger portion of the care work that they look after, and because of that, it affects how involved they can be in their profession, in higher education, and so forth. And so women are not able to reach positions of decision making, leadership roles, decision making roles, even governance, where a lot of these decisions that actually lead to conflict and war are taken, are mostly occupied by men, because women are primary, caregivers and so forth. So there seems to be this understanding that at a structural level, systems of society need to change to allow women to participate more in decision making, to allow women to really affect or participate in mainstream decisions, high level decisions. Because research also shows that women are more opposed to war. Like women, mothers, for example, don't want to send their sons to war. They are naturally more empathetic, more loving, compassionate. They are more inclined to peaceful solutions rather than war and conflict. So I'm just wondering what kind of structural or systemic changes can we hope for?
Thank you. I think we'll take two more questions together, and let's try to keep the questions short so that we'll have a broader, wider discussion. I think the guy at the back there raised his hand, and before we go to somebody else. Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, AEI, for organizing such a wonderful forum. Congratulations.
Cut all that, please, so that we save
Okay.
time.
So basically, I like probably the forum, what we call topic should change to ASEAN Women Centrality, Peace and Security, rather than putting the woman outside the framework. My question is actually in the ASEAN context, we have the Aicha. Yeah, Aicha, the member of parliament. I wonder, in this particular perspective, how effective is the role of women legislator in ASEAN in putting the women centrality agenda? Yeah, and then the second question is actually, we have been experiencing the Cebu Declaration since 2007. It's a rhetoric declaration, but what happened after that? Because I'm very involved with the gender study on the ASEAN women migration, and I believe that this is just a rhetoric statement, and we need to see some proper action plan to see the realization of the Cebu Declaration. Thank you.
One more question, please, then leave it to the speakers.
I'll stay sitting. I'm from the Embassy of Switzerland. And first of all, a short remark. The ASEAN Committee on Women actually became a member of the WPS Focal Point Network at the invitation of Switzerland in 2022. Towards my questions, first question was how the role of women is being addressed with respect to the conflict in Myanmar, whether that has been a discussion within ASEAN. And a second question maybe to Professor Dr. Shanthi, with respect to how you see the government of Malaysia addressing recommendations from the CEDA review. Or, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to start first? Please.
To address the first question, reconciliation is very important in care work. Don't continue to burden women with care. The reconciliation here is between men and women. So care responsibilities needs to be shared to free women to enter into whatever roles they want to be in, decision making and others. So I feel that it's extremely important for us to start within our own space, home space. If reconciliation doesn't take place there, then you will have major issues. That's the reason for the rise in domestic violence during COVID, because the inequality exists. So when we talk about gender inequality or gender equality, it doesn't start from outside the home. It has to start within the home. And when there is a lack of equality within the home, then there will be violence. The same principle applies on a larger scale. Why are there wars? Because there's inequality of power between nations. The powerful abuse those who lack power. The rich are able to use technology and arms, and sometimes not even human beings to kill human beings. Technology can do that. So it's inequality that is harming and committing the violence. So I think the reconciliation needs to take place first in the home. That is extremely important. Address gender inequality at home, and then you see violence reduced at home. And maybe mindsets will change amongst not just women, but men too. The question on the CEDAW recommendations. I think the CEDAW recommendations are important. We need to address it. Malaysia is not doing very well in terms of gender equality. In the World Economic Forum ranking, we are really very disappointing. And if we look at ASEAN as a region, we have countries like Philippines on the top 50, and then we have Malaysia really rock bottom. This inequality within the region is very, very unhealthy, which needs to be addressed. And we need to look at which indicators Malaysia is not doing well in and address those. And CEDAW has highlighted quite a lot of this, and Malaysia needs, the government itself needs to be more proactive. But we cannot just rely on government. Culture, norms, all these things also play a role in why we are in the state we are in. So individuals have to also embrace gender transformative kind of values. So that is to a question. I think to the Cebu one, I will leave it to the diplomats.
Okay, Dato Astanah, please.
Thank you. I was at the UN in the third committee when the United Nations Security Council adopted the Women, Peace, Security agenda. And I have always had a distaste for it. So I want to thank Dr. Shanthi for giving voice and giving me the reason for disliking it. It was always instinctual, and because I found your presentation incredibly interesting and just so on point on so many things. I think you need to get it out there more. You need to speak to policymakers. As to the question on the role of women as caregivers, etc., the small problem I have with your question is that you use the word allow. Women should be allowed to. Women should be allowed by whom? Yeah. Because the moment you put it in that context, you have accepted that it is a man's world and that men need to allow women. Women don't need to be allowed nothing, but we need to take that space for ourselves. So now on that issue, when the few times I talk about women's role, etc., more recently, rather than talking about what has been the situation and the figures, the facts and figures around women, the abuse, the being left behind and all of that, rather than focusing on that, an issue that I prefer to talk on is to look forward. Okay, all this has happened in a lot of societies. Looking forward, what is the potentials ahead? And one of the things I would focus on is on AI, because the world of work is changing. is this necessarily possibly beneficial to women, or is it going to make things worse? And from some of the findings out there, potentially it can be of immense benefit to women because of the potential of working from home. Not so that women can function both in their caregiver role as well as working, etc. And I'm saying that before Dr. Shanthi comes after me. But simply because that allows anonymity. And when you have anonymity, your gender doesn't matter. And I would think who stands to benefit more from this? I would suggest it would be women, because it's women who has tended to lose when their gender is obvious. So then how do women play on this, or what is it that we can speak to governments and to businesses from this angle, is then to look at algorithms to make sure that there isn't bias in the algorithms, so that all of us, not women, all of us will be able to move forward more equally. So that would be something I would suggest, because yes, the world has had a lot of problems, and I think focusing on that, like Einstein says, you can't keep, giving the same sort of solutions to the same problems and expect different outcomes. So let's look forward, what are the different things we can do? On the suggestion that rather than talking about women, peace, security, or ASEAN centrality, we look at women's centrality. It sounds, on the surface of it, it sounds good. I have a problem with it. And I think this is, I suspect, within the ASEAN level, I think more generally, the countries in ASEAN have a more even approach to both men and women. And so to say women's centrality, then what happens to the men? Which also I was attracted to Dr. Shanthi when you talk about in peacekeeping, peace building, etc., women are seen as necessarily victims, etc., to be protected and all. And then I was thinking, is that necessarily ASEAN's approach? And I think instinctually, I think maybe ASEAN, whether they realize it or not at the political level, is actually uneasy with this. Because I do believe that all our governments do actually value our citizens equally. The gender doesn't matter. It is the fact that they are a citizen. What your gender is your problem, but the fact that you are a human person, you matter. And so I think we need to be a little bit cautious. We may think it's a positive thing to put women's centrality, etc., but everything comes at a cost. And I think we should be careful about it. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, Ambassador Elizabeth Buensuceso.
You,
May give the final. Yeah.
maybe I attack it from the structural, because you mentioned structural, and two co-panelists have already excellently discussed the cultural aspect of it. From the structural point of view, there is a need for national legislation to catch up with ASEAN commitments. We consulted the AIPA, ASEAN Interparliamentary Assembly, 2 months ago, and I have urged them to urge parliamentarians from ASEAN to translate ASEAN commitments into national legislation. For example, I'm sorry to give you the example of the Philippines, but we found this very effective. Ambassador Ponce will affirm this. You know that we have a legislation that requires all levels of government to set aside 15% of all budgets to gender and development. And you can use that as your, tool or to advance. For me, the key word is participation. When women participate in political processes, when women participate in decision-making processes, when women participate in peacekeeping, peace building, peace maintenance, etc., then they look at issues and conflicts and problems from gender lenses. Like now, I cannot see you properly. But when I put on my glasses, I can see how handsome you are and how beautiful you are. This is the difference between in the gender issues. Again, on structural issues, so 15% of we call it God budget. it's basic. Again, it's money. Sorry to talk about money, but money moves a lot of things. Cebu Declaration, thank you very much, sir, for bringing this up. I failed to mention that one of the flagship projects of the Philippines when we were chair, of course, as I told you, the chairmanship is a very strategic mechanism to bring up your national concerns. Migration is one of the most difficult issues to negotiate in ASEAN because we come from different points of view. Some are sending countries, some are receiving countries, some are both sending and receiving, and some are neutral. So it's one of the most, I think it's even as difficult as the South China Sea issue. And yet, we were able to come up with a consensus on migrant workers in 2017, which was one of our deliverables during our chairmanship. We were able to come up with a consensus that have improved both the issues of migrant workers sending countries as well as migrant workers receiving countries. By the way, the lady from Switzerland, I want to remind Switzerland and Norway. I was ambassador to Norway. I campaigned for the membership of Norway and Switzerland in the ASEM when I was ASEM SOM leader in 2012. Spanish ambassador is looking at me here. It's not a controversial subject, but I'll tell you later why. But anyway, again, were you the one to ask about Myanmar? This is my last point. Okay. During the summit on WTS in 2021, I think, where the Australian Prime Minister was present, I have proposed that the ASEAN Women for Peace OPAR members accompany the special envoy to Myanmar so that they can look at the issue from a different perspective, different gender lenses, so that they will not talk. Maybe people are afraid when women talk. So they will not speak. They will just make recommendations. I hope they take up my proposal for the OPAR. The OPAR the name is quite misleading. It was a compromise because I had wanted to use. I negotiated for the creation of this OPAR registry. It looks very tame. It sounds very tame. But these are women experts on facilitation, mediation, negotiation, peace advocacy, etc. But as I said, there were differing appetites for this kind of a mechanism. I would like the OPAR to accompany, because the Office of the Special Envoy for Myanmar is already established. So all you have to do is you can call them friends, OPAR friends of the Special Envoy, and they can go and see how they would recommend, peaceful solutions to the conflict. So I don't have much time, but some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Elizabeth. Let me mention that this event is supposed to finish at 4:30. I'm sure Ambassador Maria Ponce would agree that we should organize another one, this time over 5 hours, perhaps. Let me pass the cue to the MC because she's got a few more post-forum events, and then we'll end the forum after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists, moderator, and participants for this enlightening discussion. Now we would like to invite Professor Dato Rajah Rasiah and Her Excellency Maria Angela A. Ponce to present the tokens of appreciation to our esteemed panelists. May I now ask Her Excellency Ambassador Elizabeth P. Buensuceso to receive her token from Professor Rajah and Ambassador Ponce. May I request Ambassador Buensuceso to please return to her seat. And now may I call on Her Excellency Dato Astanah Abdul Aziz. Thank you, Dato Astanah. You may now return to your seat. Professor Dr. Shanthi Thambiah, may I now invite you to please come to the front for your token. Thank you, Professor. You may now return to your seat. And now, Ambassador Ponce and Professor Rajah will also exchange their tokens of appreciation. May I now invite all speakers for a group photo with Professor Dato Rajah and Ambassador Ponce.